Welcome. I am Jadin Norby, and today I'll be talking about the Victor Newberry case, discussing for my English 358 writing and research project. Today with me, I have my roommate Halston Thompson. He's going to be helping us discuss the ongoing process of the Victor Newberry case. It was a sudden and uncharacteristic death of a man in his mid 50s that died like very recent or very suddenly, and the town does not think that it was not characteristic of him. He was found outside of his vehicle dead, zero point 0.9 miles away from his house, in the wrong direction of any of his friends' house, and he was found in a ditch dead. And
no jacket, no coat in the middle of winter.
So it was just super uncharacteristic. Everyone suspect there is something else going on. But the thing that is really weird is how quickly the state officials, so like the medical examiner and the sheriffs and all that stuff, the detectives, they never looked into the case. They never put anything else on it. They said it was just a casual death, hypothermia. Must have got drunk and went out driving and just collapsed or passed out in the ditch. And then there was nothing else. This sheriff quickly deemed that there was no foul play involved. But as we dig in more and do more research and talk to some of these town, the members of the town that knew Victor, they all say that it was super uncharacteristic and he can handle his alcohol, and that he would never go out without a jacket in the middle of winter. It was December. It was the day after Christmas, and they just say he would never do that. So with a super suspicious death like this, why was it not looked into anymore by these state officials? No one truly really knows, and it still's left the town in a state of disbelief of what really happened. So usually in a case like this, we'll give you a background of Victor right away. So Victor had moved to Glen Ullin, a small town in North Dakota, in Morton County, about 10 to 15 years ago from the East Coast. So he had been living there long enough to build relationships, understand people, and from what people are saying, apparently he was a very nice guy. He was always able to help, always there to help. He worked as a bartender in one of the local bars, and he also worked as a construction worker as well. And he was kind of a quiet guy. He never really discussed more about his life himself, but he would never push anybody away. He was always friendly, and he was super kind-hearted. So it just kind of is a little suspicious about everything. A little bit more about Victor was that he just was a typical guy. He would go to work. He'd be able to handle his drinks. There's one story from some of Victor's friends was that he'd be able to sit there and drink Crown Royal, and he would drink a half bottle and he wouldn't even be affected. So they said he could really handle his liquor, and it became really suspicious of why they believe that it is not what it is. And so apparently that night of his death, he was working at the bar, and he had told one of his coworkers or someone else that he is going to head out for 5 minutes and he'll be right back. Victor's usually been super reliable, and they've never had any problems with him. So they said, okay, he'll probably just be right back. And then apparently the next morning they found him dead in the ditch.
Yeah, and one suspicious thing about that, he left the bar without his jacket or phone, and everyone that knows Victor knows that he would always have his jacket in the winter, and he never went anywhere without his cell phone. So that's just another weird thing about this case.
Victor was known, and everyone knew this about Victor, but he was always scared of getting a DUI. And so they always said that he would never drive under the influence in this case, or in his case of any drinking or anything. He would never drive, and so this was also very uncharacteristic of Victor himself. So with all these just blur areas and suspicion and all this suspicion going on, the big question is, why was this case pushed over so quickly and just closed so fast without any extra like examination or investigation going on? And so when we look at this, they usually bring in like a medical examiner. On cases like these where they are super suspicious, they bring in a medical examiner. And in North Dakota, his name is Dr. Masello. He is typically from Virginia. He was a medical examiner there, and they would do close for anywhere from 700 to 800 cases in a year. And there's usually about, I think there was 3 back then when in Virginia when they were doing it. But Dr. Masello is known for his mistakes. He has previously been in a case where there was a female that had some, or he deemed to have head trauma or have an illness that caused swelling in the brain, was more so. And from later investigation from outside sources and other sheriffs and stuff, or indeed other detectives, they had deemed that her husband had murdered her, and they had this really big suspicion, but Dr. Masello stood strong in his word on his autopsy, on his report, that his autopsy and his examination was correct. But they found this to be wrong, because in the court, when everybody was there, the husband of the lady who had passed or who had died was there, and they found that the husband murdered her. They came out with it. They opened up, and apparently the husband had somehow brought in a weapon and committed suicide in the middle of the court. And so this is where they deemed that it was definitely the husband.
Another weird thing about Dr. Masello, he has previously stated that his autopsy reports should not be used in legal proceedings, which is kind of a weird thing considering he's the medical examiner for the state.
Yeah, that is really weird. And when you're doing these examinations and these, the process of going over these autopsies, you're using them to close cases, close deaths that are supposed to be used to be a legal proceeding that is supposed to close a death. And so that brings a lot of suspicion. Does he not have confidence in himself? Is he lazy? But why did he think that way? It's a really hard question that we'll never know, because the only person that should know it is Dr. Masello himself. But another thing is, in the Victor Newberry case, he had just deemed that that he died from hypothermia. And from other investigation and stuff that we'll go through later, there was a lot more to it seemed, than just straight up hypothermia. And so, is this due just because Masello didn't want to go into it any further, or no one really knows, but the margin of error is very, very high for Dr. Masello himself. When I start thinking about this, a lot of us common folk, we put a lot of our trust in these examiners, these medical examiners. They're supposed to be these professionals. But from a lot of these cases that we don't feel right about, why do we put all of our trust into these professionals and these examiners?
And another question I have is, how do we hold the medical examiners accountable? How do we verify their work?
See, that's really hard, because we can't really hold them accountable unless there are multiple examiners, and in North Dakota there's only one. When we think about, like, they're supposed to be the professionals, we're supposed to have trust in them, because we can't do the work that they're doing unless there's another one. And when we don't have, like, when we only have one in North Dakota, we don't really have much of an answer for it.
We don't have the checks and balances to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, so it's very hard. We don't know. There's a lot of margin of error, and this is a pretty ongoing thing. Like, in many states, there's only one medical examiner. So does this happen in a lot more states? Is there this many mistakes that could be made? It's just hard, and these are some things that we'll just never really know. So back to the Victor Newberry case. When we started doing some research, there has been a podcast that James Wallner does it's called the Dakota Spotlight. And he was very curious about this Victor Newberry case, and he dug very in depth with the community, talking to them about their side and seeing how Victor was as a person. Was there anything going on? Was there anything that may have happened that suspected foul play? And so as we started digging into this, we found out there was actually quite a few different happenings that they kind of each had their own story. Even like in a small town, there's going to be many rumors, there's going to be many suspicions going on. And so we're going to start with that night, how there was 3 new people into the bar. The night that Victor was working at the bar, there's 3 new people who came in, and no one knew who they were. There was a male and 2 females, and they seemed like they were selling something. They later found out this to be ecstasy. So they were trying to sell drugs, do all this stuff. They were all having a good time. They were just there. Everyone was kind of curious. Since it's a small town, usually everybody knows everybody. And from what we know from other people and other officials, and talking to some other people around the time, we found out that one of the females that was selling these drugs had left with Victor, left the bar at the same time that Victor asked for the 5-minute break. And it was really weird because it kind of fit in ties to the first curiosity of when they found Victor. They thought there was extra footsteps, there was handprints around the vehicle, and so it kind of made sense. But apparently she went with Victor, and they were driving, and the vehicle had crashed into the ditch, and where it was still left when they found it the next morning. But what is really weird is apparently they were both drunk, and after this crash had happened, she says that Victor had went into the ditch and had rolled over and was laying there, and that she thought he was going to be fine, and that he was just laying there trying to catch his breath or something, or that he was just stopping in the ditch, and that even if he was passed out, she wouldn't have been able to roll him over, pick him up, move him. She said that she was not strong enough. And at this point, there was also suspicion that Victor had been either foaming at the mouth, or she thought that he might have been throwing up, and so she just thought it was a normal happening. But where this gets really just weird is that she walked all the way back to town. It was 0.9 miles away from where the car was found to where the bar was. And she walked all the way back to town and continued to go to the bars without even calling anybody for help to go pick Victor up. She never talked about that he was there or anything. She never said anything what was going on. So that's just another very weird occurrence that has happened, and many people in the town understood this. And like, they eventually found out that was going on, and they said, why would she not help? It's just very wrong. I don't know why somebody would just leave a man stranded in the ditch, especially on December 26th when it was super cold in North Dakota, as many people know. When we're really thinking about this case, there's some other very just weird things going on. In the past, Victor had been dating this girl named Donna, I believe her name was. Donna. And when, on the date that Victor died, Donna had been dating after a while of, it's been a while since Donna and Victor were dating, but Donna in the previous day had been dating a guy that everyone knew as Victor's nemesis in the town named Henry. And Henry, there was a lot of facts and a lot of people saying that Henry would previously just constantly threaten Victor. And this is due because they know that Henry is very racist to a point, and Victor was a man of color, and so they either think it's of that, but they don't know what else could have been going on between the two. But they always hated each other, and they say this man Henry would threaten Victor on every occasion that he could. He would threaten him saying, hey, I'll end you, I'll finish you, I'll be able to take care of you. He would always say he had some ties to the mob, which no one really true to find or be if it was true or not. And so they always just kind of left it alone. And it was very weird because when James Wallner of the Dakota Spotlight, when he had been looking into it, the mob was one of the first things that he had thought might have been a big problem with this whole case. And that he thought, well, it kind of makes sense if that's why some of these state officials kind of brushed it off. They might have been scared. They might have been just pushed off about this. But no one really could have true ties to saying that, yeah, Henry had ties to the mob. It was only he said, she said type thing. And so no one really had true facts. But it still doesn't explain why the case just wasn't looked into any farther. Victor's death was surely just uncharacteristic. It was really weird. Now that we know that there was someone else with him, why was there so much just weird things going on? Why didn't she call in or anything? Why didn't she let anybody know that Victor was in the ditch?
Why didn't the police investigate into her further? Why didn't they question her?
Yeah, it brings everything back to why it's in the police and the state officials' hands. It's in the medical examiner's hands. It's in the investigators' hands. Why didn't they go back and look into it? In a small town like this, of a guy in his 50s, he just up and dead. Why didn't they look into it? It should be even weird, or it should be even more weird and bring more suspicion to everything. And so when these officials just kind of brush it off, how does it truly affect the community? When we think about it, if we can't put our trust into these state officials, do we just kind of fall apart and not really do much more about it? If we can't be safe and feel safe in our own town, and that our these law officials, these enforcers and stuff like that, if they're not going to have our back and put anything correctly, like if they're going to just brush it off and say a death is a death, what should we do? What should we be feared? But it as a community, they were all pretty shaken up, and that they all kind of had their own backstories and suspicions about Victor's death itself.
Most of them would agree in saying that it seemed like there was more than Victor just passing out in the ditch. It seemed like there was something else that happened, like foul play. And I think a lot of them were pretty angry with the state officials about that they ruled it hypothermia and that Victor just passed out from being too drunk. because they knew that that was uncharacteristic for him.
So yeah, it's the biggest thing about this that I get out of it is the case was never truly investigated into any farther from any officials or anything along those lines, but everyone believes it should. And when the whole community is on the back of saying that it wasn't right, they're the ones that know. The law enforcement and the medical examiners, they just show up. They were doing their job apparently quickly. They were there. They didn't even look to what could have escalated or anything like that, and they just left it alone. So in today's society, this has to be a fairly big issue. Like now we're seeing all these social rights and everything going on, and the injustice that's happening within our community, and everyone knows it's not right. And so as we look farther into these enforcements, can we trust them? And no one really knows. There's very mixed communication, very mixed feelings, and overall, I just don't know how they can truly gain our trust back, especially when you're supposed to feel super secure and super just safe in your own community. So, thanks for listening, and goodbye.